Hello, my name is Mikael,
And my name is Mario.
and we're going to talk about the book Sherlock Holmes, Study in Scarlet.
Okay.
To begin with, we're going to talk about Sherlock Holmes,
Mhm.
how he is, how he's perceived in the book,
Yes, and his personality and characteristics.
characteristics.
Yes. Okay, so we'll begin with the first impression or the first mention of the mention of his name.
Yeah.
So we'll begin with when Watson gets back home to Britain from
From the war in
from the
Afghanistan.
war in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And he came upon this friend, his old friend called Stanford.
Yeah.
And this guy, they're just talking, just chatting, and then it came up about that Watson is searching for a lodging or apartment.
Yeah, and he's in need of a roommate because he has like financial problems,
Yes.
and he can't afford to live on his own in
Yeah.
a city like London.
It's very expensive.
Yeah.
So then Stanford continues with saying that he has a companion who has said this already twice today, and it's this guy Sherlock Holmes, who the readers don't know about yet, but we're about to. So
So the first impression we as readers get of Sherlock Holmes is when Stanford is explaining him to Dr. Watson, and he explains him as a little queer in his ideas, and as well as an enthusiast in some branches of science, but he also says that he's a decent fellow.
Yes, and therefore we get a small point of view of how Stanford perceived this guy, and with this we're headed to the laboratory where we get our first impression of the handshake and how they're greeting one another, and directly there Sherlock Holmes says, "How are you?" and then directly assumes that he comes from Afghanistan, which shock us as readers, because we don't know how this guy can just come up with this answer.
Yeah, and he shocks Dr. Watson as well. But after Watson has moved in with Holmes, we as readers can get a little more in-depth perception of how Holmes is as a person.
How he thinks and how he analyzes different things. For example, how he focuses on the things that only focus his that only direct his focus to his objects or his mission of solving a crime, for example, that he's a detective.
Yeah.
And that himself, Watson, who is the narrator of the book, is observing and
Yeah. Because it's important to notice that everything that we see in the book, everything that we read is through Watson's eyes. 99% of the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Except for when Sherlock Holmes is explaining himself. But that's also through Watson's eyes. So. And this makes it very biased, and it's like you can't really know if you can trust Watson's view of Sherlock Holmes.
Exactly. And with this view and this kind of way of speaking to the readers, you will see that you get to know more about Holmes' habits due to Watson's injury and him having to use the stilts, or how it's called, and therefore he just observes and see how this Sherlock Holmes, who is so smart, behaves and his routines.
Yeah.
And you can see a judgmental attitude to this.
Yeah, and Stanford in the beginning mentions that Holmes is not really an extrovert, and he's quite quiet. But you can also see that Watson mentions things related to this fact twice when he states that Holmes was somewhat quiet, and also that sometimes would just be on the sofa, barely making any effort to communicate. Yeah.
And this Watson perceives as being on narcotics and just behaving in such a way that a normal human being is not supposed to behave. Like, you can stare up the roof for several hours, even through midnight to the morning, and not move or make a decent conversation about the weather or whatever. So this is a quite odd experience for Dr. Watson, and this continues with his lists he makes.
Yeah, because Dr. Watson doesn't really have any friends in London because he's not from there, and he ain't got no friends or family or anything. So what he does, he spends most of his time observing Sherlock, and from this he observes him like every day and every hour, and from this he makes a bullet point list on how he is as a person and what traits he has and what he's good at and not.
And this also leads to different things, as we can see in the narrator. The perspective of these lists are called his limits and perceived as judgmental or very judgmental and a bad attitude to this Sherlock Holmes, because Watson, I think he's very...
and this is worth to notice is that this is before all of the crimes that Sherlock Holmes is gonna show Watson that he is quite knowledgeable and not as bad as you think.
Because he's a very extraordinary person with a very detailed kind of way of looking at other things, like a thing in crime scenes, and therefore in the crimes we can see that he's more of a spectacular person.
Yeah, he's very eccentric.
Yes.
Speaking of the crime scene, when you come on page 38, Sherlock Holmes explains some of his methods, and we could say earlier that in the text we get to know that he's a private detective and a consult with other detectives to solve their cases.
Exactly.
And and he continues in the explanations of. We get to know the fact that Sherlock Holmes is a detective and he's a consul as well with other detectives to solve their cases, because when they can't seem to find a solution or solve their case, they go to Sherlock Holmes, who helps them.
And I think that this also shows later on when he's about to solve a case or at a crime scene, because he's so excited about being there and seeing all the traces and all the things you can see who leads to the murder or the suspect, and therefore when he helps other people he gets that kick and that feeling of being so smart, because that's his characteristics.
Yeah, he really gets that kick of cuffing the murder. But when you look at the crime scene at later on at page 38, Sherlock Holmes also explains some of his methods that he used to reach certain conclusions. And this can be seen when Sherlock talks about the writing on the wall at the crime scene, which is the German word Rache, which means revenge in English.
No, in German.
Yeah, revenge in German.
Absolutely. And this, we can also see that when they are arriving at when they have arrived and in the crime scene, the first thing he maybe looks at things that maybe people don't notice, but the fact that he asked Watson first, because he has a medical background of maybe the body or the different details, he always asks the persons who's involved in the case, and not say what he is about to analyze or how he thinks about the study exactly until the very end of the case.
Yeah, and I think that's quite interesting because that makes him look like
the hero,
a fool, or to everyone else and the other detectives. He looks like someone who doesn't know anything or is just lost in the case. But then he fascinates everyone when coming up with a case in the end, and he solves.
And this is like, when we see this, it's become clear in his head, but we don't see this until he explains all this of the traces and all this leading to the next clue.
Yeah.
And that is very, very spectacular. I don't know. It's surprising, because the thing he does, he just puts all this clues together, And then when he tells them, all the detectives surrounding this crime scene are just shocked and doesn't know how this add up. But in his head, it's just common sense.
Yeah, an example of this is when he almost characterizes himself by saying that he has written a comprehensive study on the subject of cigar ashes that is used with the words on the wall. And this reinforces an idea about him that he really have an extensive knowledge on certain subjects that surrounds that is involved in his crime solving.
That he's like above all the rest.
Yeah. So he like puts out everything that's not relevant to him, and he just uses the information that he needs, which in this case is the study of cigar ashes, and everything else doesn't
add up to the crime scene.
Yeah. So and this is what makes the difference between him and the other detectives. In this case, the Scotland Yard detectives, which is Lestrade and Gregson.
Okay.
Yeah. As well as this, we can see that Sherlock is also very sure of himself, and he knows that his mind works in a different way to other people, and sometimes does not truly understand how these people, and how other people not function in the same manner. This can be seen by the end of the novel when he explains the entire case for Gregson, Lestrade, and Watson. He expects that Watson and everyone else will not comprehend his arguments and his logic and the deductions about the case. So he explains things very, very in more detail, and he even talks about his logic thinking about the case.
And this explains how his thought process is and how his brain is more capable of extreme thinking in detail, as I said before. How Watson just examined the body, but how Sherlock look at the horse cabin or the horse trails on the taxi or the cab, as in the text. How he analyzed the height of the murder and how the spaces of the footsteps to acknowledge how tall the suspect or the couple is. Before saying that there's only a body, so it's not very clear.
And as well as he also thinks about that his poison has been used to make the murder, which is not very clear from the beginning.
Exactly.
So he's a very interesting person.
Yeah, spectacular.
If we go over to the we can say setting analysis.
Yeah. We can see that this obviously takes place in England, London, and this is around 1878 through 1880, which is the Victorian period. How we know this is because the period
because in the beginning of the novel, Watson has just come back from England from the Second Afghan War, which takes place in 1878.
Exactly.
And it's when the British invaded Afghanistan in order to prevent the Russian expansion into India. But in the United Kingdom, the 19th century or the Victorian period was mostly marked by the Industrial Revolution, which changed the contemporary society in many, sometimes quite intense ways. And the Industrial Revolution was one of the most direct causes of the enormous growth of cities like London, for example. And the Industrial Revolution
ways of transportation. So
example, the trains, which was a big new way of transporting yourself from point A to point B. And another way of transportation that is showcased in the book is by the cabs, or the hansom cabs, as they call, which basically was a horse that was dragging a form of cab on
wheels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was very much used in London during the
You see,
Victorian
it's commonly
period.
used by transportations, as I said, from A to B, or someone falling after someone. It wasn't a cab who followed that car. It was not that kind of action. It was more.
Which, if you read it today, you maybe think that when they say a cab, they mean a car, but it was really a horse.
Yes, it can be misunderstood, but we have to be clear. So, and take hands to the period of time, the Victorian period, that these machines or these cars are not available. These are just horses just pulling a cab kind of thing with wheels on. So this taking in consideration makes the settling more realistic, and they are taking the industrial period of time into consideration in the book, and have not, what I've seen, as so far misunderstood or have placed on a different machine that maybe exists now, like a telephone of an iPhone or something in the text. And it's just so, it's a cab with a horse pulling it, blah blah.
Yeah.
It's a train. I don't think they mention heat or.
With so many people that moved in to the cities from the countryside and rural area, the city life was accompanied by many different and new anxieties for people who lived there and had never experienced it before. So, such as crime rates on the city and on familiar neighborhoods and so on.
Yeah.
And it was really a strange phenomenon back then. The Victorian lived in the midst of all these changes, which caused that threatened stability in life, and these changes caused the Victorians, like the people who lived during the Victorian period, to be frightened of much that was new. And London was a city with a great character of its own.
Yeah.
And the fog-shrouded gaslight image that you can see in the book
Exactly.
is quite a stereotypical image.
Yeah.
Of,
it really paints a picture in your mind how the city looks.
Yeah. And it was created by some artists and which led to these stereotypes to control this massive city.
Yeah.
And this art is the main reason to why London is looked at as it is today by us who reads these books that was created back then.
Yeah, and we can see just a throwback, but when the different detectives, as we sooner found out about, that comes to Sherlock Holmes' apartment that he talks business about, is from different classes. So it's just not the upper class that is a detective, it's also different classes in the society, where the Industrial Revolution were probably like the different the fabrics, no, the fabrics not
The industries.
The industries and the people working there who had maybe not a lot of money could still be a detective, not maybe a real phenomenon detective like Sherlock Holmes, but maybe there was no limit for these kind of jobs. And as I said, the government and the private detectives was a phenomenon that there was so many mysterious men out there just solving cases because
and a character like all these things about London makes it that a character like Sherlock Holmes could only have been written in a context like the ones in London during the Victorian period, because the context, the environment and the time it was created in were essential to his character. And the changing reality of the city, as I told before, and how people were frightened about the new life and crime and etc. People was in dire need of the services of something that was better than just the normal police.
Exactly.
Or a common detective, which this desire is you can see this in the book, that the readers in the 1890s, when this book was read by a lot of people, it was really what the people needed.
Yeah.
So you can really see how.
It was kind of upbringing of a book that people look up upon. It was like a book that some people have wished existed earlier, or some kind of motivation that you can be as we said, a detective, or some kind of inspiration to the more sophisticated job of just not being a policeman. We can be a detective. And this brings up to the pictures I see when I was reading this book. It was so accurate because I was seeing a movie yesterday about this Sherlock Holmes movies, and I was seeing these rooms when I was reading this book, and I was fantasizing about how the windows were shown, how the living room was where he did his medical examinations. You really get a great picture by the author's work in his text, and you can see how the cities were perceived, and how the cabs and all these things like adds up to together, and therefore when you see the movie you're not very surprised, because the movie only shows this much and the text shows much
and this is because the text shows this. It shows this stereotypical image of how the Victorian period worked.
Very good, I must say.
Yeah, but if we go to the part 2,
yes,
the writer Doyle, he moves the narrative. He moves the narrative decades earlier to the American West.
Yeah, exactly.
When we see Lucy and John Ferrier, who were pioneers who struggled through the to survive in the desert after their group, who they were with, died and starved to death. But they are, however, saved by the assistance of these Mormons, or the Latter-day Saints, as they are called.
And this is such a extraordinary piece of Sherlock Holmes' books, because they're not describing the solving of a case by the beginning through the middle of the book. They just unravel the case in the end of the book, and you will just be shocked at how things are puzzled back in, and how the puzzles just come in together, and just put up a big picture of how the crimes are committed and how they got away, and how, for example, how they followed the cab and the person was not there. And this segment where on the desert, they just paints a whole nother story that we have not been told before. And this just paints the big picture even more. And then later on, Sherlock Holmes, as we said earlier, will just solve the case like it's nothing.
And this part 2 that takes place in the desert in Utah is really, as well as how
described in London.
It's described in London. It's very much how it was during the Victorian period, but in the Utah, in the United States, it's very accurate, because the Mormons. It was the beginning of the Mormon movement in the 1840s when this takes place, and under the leadership of Brigham Young in the real world, who is a character in the book, he led his followers in Utah in the 1840s, and
they really put up relative facts to the book, that there are real characters and real persons who have led in the movement, and who have affected this kind of people who to get to the other countries, or to get through the things that they have been on. And these things just adds on too much reality and fantasizing and pictures of how it was. From the streets, from the fogs to the industries, and how the detective just solved the case. It just brings up both personality and for me personally, like a originality of this kind of genre. It's like very distinctive, kind of specialized. It's like Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling, how she is able to put so many details into a scene, and you're just there. You're experiencing everything in this plot, and this really this keeps on putting on motivation to read this book. It's not getting boring.
And another thing that's very, very... Okay, då kan vi köra. If you take the view on other people from the book, here is an example of etc. racism of women. You can see a very, very negative way that every man in the book looks on women. Because though the novel itself is not misogynistic, it reveals the sexist attitudes and how the practices towards women, both in England and in the USA, in Utah. And at the time Doyle was writing this Sherlock Holmes, the stories. An example of this is when Holmes and Watson, the story's protagonist and the narrator, looks. They both casually insult women on almost a daily basis, but they describe them as being vain and weak. What basically we can say about Holmes and Watson's look at women is that they make claims like when they talk about, for example, when they talk about the competition between Gregson and Lestrade, they say, he remarks that they have their knives into one another too. They are as jealous as a pair of professional beauties, which is the late 1970s and late 17th century equivalent or models in today's society. And
this may not be like so clear to them that it's not okay to say it, but this is just a broad statement that it's not okay today if we see in the modern society. And this was often maybe okay in this kind of situation, comparing people being weak or seeing people as a woman of them being slow or weak or some kind of not good enough.
And another example is when Holmes is chasing the old woman that comes to collect the wedding ring that is found at the murder. When the women he was following had escaped, he says that we were the old women to be so taken in. It must have been a young man and an active one too, besides being an incomparable actor. But though the old woman in disguise was actually a man, it's
kind of an insult saying that she looks like a man. Is that what you're saying?
He doesn't consider the ability. An old woman can have the ability and strength to escape him, and he doesn't look at himself that he has done something wrong. It must have been so that it wasn't a woman.
The fact that this person got away with a cab or how it was, and they got away from this Sherlock Holmes. It doesn't mean that you're like you're a man, or you can be a woman as well. It's not a thing about the gender.
And if you would say something like that today, it would be a huge outrageous statement. But the most striking, however, I believe, is when you talk about the Mormons and how they perceive women and how they.
It was actually kind of weird. I didn't understand that so much. That's something that
it was about the Mormon marriage system and the practice men used towards women in general. For example, while men in the Mormon society was expected to have multiple wives. The women were not allowed to have a multiple husband and was seen as like objects for the man to own. And
to say something about that kind of people is not okay if you don't have like strict evidence and things, and those things just add up to each other, and just the readers who maybe don't have great source criticism maybe starts to believe this, and this maybe starts rumors and stereotypes, and this just adds on to another, and this is just not okay if you just things, or if you think these things about people,
Yeah.
like you can't think about it if you don't like have evidence, crucial evidence that shows this is the case.
Yeah, but in this Mormon society, this actually was the case in the real life, not just in this book. And it was the way you looked at women back then. It was like you looked at them in the Mormon society as a supply to be distributed to men.
Like the man has his freedom, and the woman was this like thing you can have, and the object you have with you when you're going somewhere, or this trophy. This is not how we see, for example, women today. These are individuals, and just as men, they're just equal as worth.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's quite shocking.
Yeah. Do we have something more to say?
I don't know about that. I guess the things to add on, but Sherlock Holmes in the setting of London, for example, he was very comfortable. I don't know if we spoke about it earlier, but how he got every street, and actually the writer, who only has lived in London 2 years before writing this book, only writes about the central parts of London.
Yeah, he only writes about the central parts and a bit of outside of the south side of London, but not so much more than that. And that clearly shows that that was the only places he knew.
Yeah.
And
there are real streets, and these are streets in London that he takes example. For example, the things that we hear about the book, or the things we read, it's real things, real objects, real cities that they search on Google Maps, and we will see that they're not just made up. The Buxton Street and the things, the murder. Yeah,
exactly. The Brixton Street was indeed a middle class street in the late 1900s.
And a thing that shocked me the most about Sherlock Holmes was that the fact that he could just extinguish every part of like a mud on the trousers and distinguish where part of the London was, and these details that we came upon maybe in the middle of the book or in the beginning, this is just details that just adds up, and as we go further back in the book, when we just see the whole puzzle just puts in a big frame and the picture solves in, we can see how these things are just common in Sherlock Holmes' mind, and the other texts are like, but how did you do this? We're not sure if this is true.
Yeah, exactly.
Very detailed book, I must say.
To summarize, we can say that it's a very detailed book. Sherlock Holmes is a very interesting person, and the view of London and of the United States is very much as it was back then, and it's quite clear to see that it's written back then and it's about back then in the Victorian period.
And I must say that a second criticism comes from the fact that the solution of the problem effectively comes through the maybe like three of the fourths of the book comes the solution of the crime scenes. And also Sherlock Holmes didn't have, I think, the right answer about the poison. It was just a stick. And this is oddly common because this is Sherlock Holmes. He's always right. So this is a bit of plot twist when we go through the solution of the case, that he was the first time maybe that he has had a wrong answer, and he was so sure and so smart at the time that the detectives didn't even think twice about it, and he just comes to solve the case. They think that it just adds up another layer of
and exactly as Sherlock Holmes had a great knowledge of the city, and he also talks about the lowest parts of the city, which was the poor parts, where a lot of crime happened. It just shows that everything in the book can be taken as,
it can really be taken by the time it really took place. It's supposed to put place, like the setting and how the different streets and the different things that we see in the book, or the different people that are stationed in the different cities, are really poor there, and they're not just making things up like a new king or new queen or a new flying car somewhere. It's just things that really, we can search these things up on the internet and just show up real. It's not made up.
Exactly.
It's not a Harry Potter movie where there's monster and it's a little bit easier to just come up with things. But this is more if we can see this in a Victorian period of time, it's very accurate. I honestly think it's not anything I would myself do, but it's just it's very accurate, and the writer who has done this and really put their effort to just fit in this time period had done an excellent job, and I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, great.
See ya.